Hello, welcome to 21 This Week. I'm Susan Heltemes, filling in for Casey Aiken. Coming up next, Jorge Mario Bergoglio came to Washington this week, and D.C. laid out the red carpet. Oh yeah, you've probably heard about him. Pope Francis and his little Fiat came to town, and the town turned giddy. Speaker John Boehner to leave Congress at the end of October. What a shocker. Our panel will share their perspectives and, of course, their parting shots. Today, we're joined by education activist Cynthia Rubenstein, Mark Uncapher, former chair of the Montgomery County Republican Party, Catholic Republican activist Jerry Cave, and Marie Wood, journalist and Catholic Democrat. Stay tuned for our take on the Pope's visit next on 21 This Week. Welcome back. Capitol Hill insiders say that devout Catholic House Speaker John Boehner had the best day of his congressional career on Thursday when he finally got a pope to address a joint session of Congress. Then on Friday, he appeared almost gleeful as he announced that he is retiring from Congress at the end of October. Mark, why now?
Well, I don't think the two things had anything to do with each other. It had more to do with what's coming up next week. The Speaker has been challenged by the fact that a minority within his caucus won't vote for a budget that can come over from the Senate, and he's faced with the criticism of then having to rely on Democratic votes to pass the legislation that comes from the Senate. And I think he just decided he had enough, and he'll let somebody else take that problem.
Jerry, so what's going to happen next?
Well, Pope Francis gave us a miracle. We finally got rid of John Boehner. How good is that? So I don't know what's going to happen, but what ought to happen is they ought to be passing bills every week and sending them up to the president to have him either sign them or veto them so that we all know in this country who the problem is.
Jerry, the problem's been over in the Senate because of the process, the procedures over in the Senate. The House can pass whatever it wants, frankly, because of majority rule, but it takes a Senate in order to pass it.
They can pass it and send it to him. It may not override his veto, but we can get it up there for him to veto it,
well,
so everybody knows what the problem is.
Either
because the roadblock is Obama and the Senate's and the Democrats.
Let's stop there for a minute. I want to hear what the Democrats have to say on this. Marie, you're here the first time today.
For sure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
What do you have to say?
I haven't been following the Boehner situation that much. My son did text me and say it is a miracle that Boehner's gone, but they say now the chances of a budget standstill might be less that he's gone, so that's good for the country.
I'm hearing the same thing, that the pressure is off in some ways for not having a shutdown, and I'm going to make a prediction on who I think will be replacing Boehner, and I do believe it'll be Kevin McCarthy.
And that's essentially what Boehner endorsed today. I was asked about him specifically, and he said, I think he'd be a good leader. Then it will be interesting, both the majority leader, the Speaker, and Pelosi will both be from California. So that will be interesting, both from the left part of the country. Jerry, what do you think about that?
Well, we have one Irish and Italian, so it's kind of like going back to Catholic grade school.
Well, it is going to be interesting, and I heard Boehner speak this morning at his press conference, and he was visibly moved by the Pope yesterday, and the Pope put his arm around him at one point and quietly thanked him for the work that he does. And he supposedly very quietly goes into schools in the Capitol Hill area, does a lot of stuff that nobody even knows about. But anyway, for the record, before we begin the conversation about the Pope, I am a Roman Catholic. So there. Pope Francis, the first Jesuit Pope, and the first Pope from the Americas, was born in Argentina to immigrant Italian parents. He may have spoken softly, caused by surgery that removed one of his lungs, but he spoke firmly, and when he left town, we all know where he stood on a myriad of issues. Before we get into the substance of his message, though, what one word would each of you use to describe the Pope's message and visit to you? So we're going to start with you, Mark.
Gridlock.
Cynthia.
Pastoral.
Jerry.
AWOL.
Marie.
Joy.
Joy. Okay. Now, you all know where we're coming from. The Pope began his whirlwind tour with a White House visit and addressed 15,000 people on the South Lawn. He invoked his recent encyclical on climate change and boosted President Obama's efforts on the issue when he noted, climate change is a problem that can no longer be left to the future generation. He added, we are living at a critical time, but we still have time to change. So Marie, is the Pope's message going to change anything in this town that's filled with climate change skeptics?
One of the messages I got from the Pope's many talks was having a dialogue. It's important and necessary to have a dialogue with your adversaries on whether religious or political stands. So I'm hoping that maybe there will be some lawmakers who will take this to heart and take a little bit of a time to assess whether their stands are correct or not. I also think, though, that for lawmakers maybe on the fence, the Pope's visit could make a difference.
Well, Mark, is there going to be any budget on the right on this issue, do you think?
Well, I think, let me answer it by another issue that he brought up, which was the issue of global poverty. There are 1 billion people who are effectively off the grid. We've made extraordinary progress over the last 40 years, but 60% of the food we produce in the world depends on fossil fuels, and the technologies associated with our modern, abundant, capitalist society have been responsible for lifting people up. What the Pope's message doesn't address are the trade-offs that exist between the material benefits that we have in our society that lifts people up and the consequences of that may frankly affect the environment.
Well, what's interesting based on what Marie said is I heard multiple Congress people in interviews across the myriad of broadcasting areas that softened a little bit after his conversation about, we need to talk. And they said,